I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Every year we have a music festival called River Bend on the Tennessee River. The end of the festival is celebrated with one of the best fireworks shows in the world. It is hell to get into or close to the festival on the last day. It's like everyone in the southeast United States wants to come and see the fireworks. My best friend Tara and I wanted to find a good vantage point that would overlook the river and watch the fireworks. We drove up a ridge near the river and pulled off into a gravel parking lot, where we found several other people with the same idea as us. Some trees were in the way, and we noticed a trail that went down the ridge. We walked about 40 yards down the trail and came to a clearing where we could see the river perfectly. We were talking and waiting on the fireworks to start. We started hearing some rustling down the trail. I thought I saw a person's silhouette move between some trees on down the ridge. Tara had a small keychain flashlight, and she took it out and shined it down the trail. We didn't see anything. We kept hearing rustling, though, and kept seeing nothing. We finally started thinking it was a really noisy squirrel. The fireworks started, and had been going on for about a minute. We heard a stick break right by me. We turned around and looked, but couldn't see anything. Tara turned on her light, and there was a man standing literally 5 feet away from me. It was so dark that we couldn't see him at all until the light was on him. It was literally like a horror movie scene. We immediately started heading up the trail, and the whole way up he was talking, saying things like, "Where are you going? What's your name? What are two pretty things like you doing here?" We ignored him and kept walking. Then he starts getting angry and saying, "Aren't you listening? Get back here." You know, nobody could hear your screams over the fireworks. I have a knife. You don't even know my name. Nobody will ever catch me if I hurt you. We started running, and we got to the top of the hill where two kids were playing, and I saw their dad standing further back. I told the kids that their dad wanted them, so that they would get close to their dad and stay a safe distance from this creepy guy. I then walked over to their dad and told them about the man that followed us up the trail, and asked if he cared if we stood with him until the man was gone. He said of course, and thanked us for sending his kids in his direction. The man stood at the beginning of the trail and watched us for a little while. Then, he finally went back into the woods. He had been watching us in the woods for at least 20 minutes before he approached us. He waited until the noise of the fireworks began before he came out. I was an 18-year-old high school senior and was about 3/4 of the way through my year. I had moved that year and switched to a school about 30 minutes away from where I used to go. I stayed in touch with a few people from my old school and got invited to go camping with a few of them over Memorial Day weekend, which basically meant getting drunk as fuck in the forest. I invited 2 girls and 1 guy from my new school to come and hang out for a night, and met them in the closest town from the campsite, about 40 minutes away. The campsite was 30 minutes away from any human signs of life outside of a shitty dirt road. The night started off fine, with everyone getting completely trashed, and me beating one of the girls I brought named Sarah at beer pong, and she was very drunk and all over me. I guess that the 18-year-old version of me that night couldn't have been going any better at that point. At 12:30, things started to die down as half of us had already puked and were heading in for the night, and I was much too drunk to even try to do anything with Sarah. A lot of the night is still a blur, but I remember climbing into the tent, and there were 5 of us, 3 guys and 2 girls. At around 2:30 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of a shotgun. I was still very drunk and had a hard time processing anything, but in my drunken state, I figured it was one of the people I was camping with being a dick. One of the guys, Brent, had stayed sober the entire night and had brought his shotgun up with him, so I figured it was him being a prick to everyone who was drunk. I check my phone and go back to sleep. I fall asleep at what I think was around 3 a.m., and I'm awakened by someone bawling their eyes out, and I'm still having a very hard time processing everything. After about 5 minutes, I realize it's Brent, and I stumble out of my tent, followed by Jeremy, and I walk out and see Brent is bleeding profusely from his nose and mouth. I run over to him, stumbling the entire time. I'm then hit in the head with the rock, and I'm knocked unconscious. Everything from this point forward is from Jeremy's point of view. Jeremy to this day is my best friend, and he told me his version of the story many times. He says I passed by a tree, and a large man lunges out and smashes my face with a rock. After hitting me, the man lunges at Jeremy and tackles him straight on his ass. Jeremy at the time was 5'8" and 140 pounds, and he describes the man was at least 6'4", 280 pounds. Jeremy is being choked to death by this wounded monster of a man, and he hears another gunshot from a pistol. Sarah had managed to find a pistol Brent had also brought with him and fired a shot, missing the man by a large amount, but it managed to startle the man, and he sprinted off into the woods. They just let him go, and Jeremy drove me and Brent to the hospital. I had 3 broken teeth and a severe concussion, and Brent had part of his tongue mutilated with a knife and a broke nose. Brent had never talked to me or any of my friends from that trip about what exactly happened when he was outside alone with the man, and refused to give police much of the description. The man was never caught, and I've never been into the deep forest again. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in the Chickamauga National Forest in northern Wisconsin. And after our experience, we did not plan to return unless we go with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin, but never to this area. We are not backpacking experts, but we've been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike to a remote section of the North Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail. It's like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We plan to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car in the following morning. We spent the night at a friend's house, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we enter the national forest boundary, we're captivated by the beauty of thick green forest. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads as we made our way to the parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to us to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-out, banged-up pickup truck, complete with a Confederate bumper sticker. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself, after we passed them. I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed they were still staring at us, and before we rounded the bend, I glanced back into the rearview mirror and saw them watching us through the haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the people, but we did not think anything about the encounter. Aside from those people, we didn't encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later. After winding our way down the narrow logging road, there was no one else parked at the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off onto the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we were marveled at the lushness of the forest. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided us ample space, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter ring, and I boiled water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around an Nalgene bottle filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars we could see away from the city. When the fire reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day, but after lugging a heavy backpack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at a state national park, I usually wore earplugs, but that night, there were no RVs or other campers to make noise, so I closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally has some apprehension whenever we're sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when she drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point. We lay silently in our tent, hearing the noise again. Our old tent had mesh windows, but the backpacking tent we were using had no window. We could only guess as to what was making that noise outside our tent. We initially thought an animal got our food and garbage bag, which we left in the shelter, but the noise was too distinct, and it didn't sound like rustling through food wrappers or camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard a persistent knocking in the darkness. Unarmed and scared shitless, we didn't know what to do. I would normally carry a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save the weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend. The knocking continued, but we remained still as to not give away our location. For all we know, whatever was making that noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it, leaves rustling and a branch breaking, and then voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We could not make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices didn't seem to be getting louder. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent, or maybe they just decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of our tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. On the entrance to the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall, and there was a number of axe and knife cuts where someone was chopping the wall. I looked at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made it back to the car. I kept glancing over my shoulder and gazing through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper to my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw there was blood smeared on the windshield, and a squirrel carcass was impaled onto the wiper blade. Hair and blood still stuck to the wiper and the hood of the car. I didn't bother cleaning the car. We threw our gear into the trunk, and I sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As we sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to the gas station by the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper and tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. That was the last trip I took to the northern woods of Wisconsin.